We are here at the Transportation Commission.
Richard Price. Sorted out our tech, we can start the next agenda item. No worries.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is FY 2023 raise application with Rich Rossman.
Good evening, Commissioners. Can you all hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. All right. This item is for approval of our county's application to the fiscal 23 raise program with USDOT. We are proposing to apply for $15 million for the Arlington Memorial Trail. This is our third attempt at this facility, previously known as the Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail. It has been renamed to emphasize the fact that it is a county project, although it has significant state and federal partnership. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review the draft board report. Again, this is our third attempt for this particular program. The request has not changed, nor has the cost in the CIP, which is $25 million. So we're applying for $15 million in raise funding, and then local funds will be used to provide the balance, which includes the 20% match for the federal grant. Applications are due at the end of February, and we had brought this to the commission as an info item, I think 2 months ago. Now we're coming back for action. So I can stop there if anyone has any questions about the Arlington Memorial Trail or about the raise application.
Thank you, Mr. Roisman. Any commissioners, if you have questions or comments, please go ahead and raise your hand, either in person where I can see it or virtually where hopefully Ms. Obakoya can see it and alert me. I will just say that this, we've heard this item before as an info item, so we're all pretty familiar. I will highlight that a thing that has happened in the interim is that the Arlington Memorial Trail has entered its environmental process, and there is an open feedback period happening right now that closes, I believe it's February 24th. I will send a link around for anybody who might want to weigh in on that. But it's two fairly similar alignments, but with some interesting kind of trade-offs between them that are worth exploring. And seeing no hands up here and not seeing any hands virtually, I will go ahead and make a motion which is that. I move the Transportation Commission recommend that the County Board approve the transmittal of an application to the Department of Transportation for the FY23 RAISE program for $15 million in federal funding for the Arlington Memorial Trail. And furthermore, that the note that the Transportation Commission recommends approval.
Second.
Is there any further discussion of the item that has been motioned and seconded? All right, then I will call. Do I have anybody virtual? I actually don't, do I?
Oh.
Wow, we can just raise our hands like olden times. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? None. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is parking updates with Melissa McMahon. No, sorry, excuse me. Performance parking pilot project. Okay. Actually, no, sorry. The agenda is mixed up here. So we have Joyce Motors with Dennis Sellon and the consultants who he will introduce.
Good evening, commissioners. Dennis Sellon here from Department of Environmental Services. And we have, actually, I don't know if anyone's in person or if anyone's virtual. I see Nick Cummings from the project team, whom I will allow to introduce. I see the oars are here from the development team, but I'm going to allow Mr. Cummings to introduce his team. And then I'll make a presentation, and then the development team will make a presentation. Nick, would you like to introduce your team?
Sure. Nicholas Cummings with Walsh Colucci here. I'm Land Use Counsel. We have members of OR Partners here. We have Ryan Orr and David Orr. I bet we have Tyler Orr as well. I see him right there. I think Mr. Grady Vaughn is there in the room with you all tonight. And then we also have members of the consultant team, the design team, who are available if we really need to dig deep on questions. But I think that between me, the Orrs, and Mr. Vaughn, we have it handled tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. And for this side, we have myself and Michael Haluski from the Real Estate Bureau are here. We have a two-part presentation, and I'm not sure if we've got two different slideshows or one, but we have two action-related items here. One is for the site plan itself, and then one is for the street vacations, which I will do forthwith. Bridget, can you bring up the presentation, perhaps?
I'll try.
Thank you. So this is a site plan it is site plan 465. The digital number is SPLN 19 quadruple 06. It is Joyce Motors at the intersection of 10th and Irving Streets. It is presented for action, and we are recommending approval for the site plan. For the approval of the site plan, the adoption of the ordinance, and for the recommendation of these street vacations. That will be the real estate item. And if you're not able to, I think maybe I could. Oh, here we are. Beautiful. Thank you. Can we align that so that we have one? Okay, yes, we can go to this slide. Perfect. Okay, I have a pretty short presentation. I'm sure the applicants is going to be more illustrative and beautiful, but I will just go quickly through mine. So this project involves the construction of up to 241 residential dwelling units and approximately 3,639 square feet of retail in a 16-story mixed-use residential building. The project allows for the preservation of the historic Joyce Motors garage facade, which you see in the lower corner of the building here, and it involves a transfer of development rights with an historic barber shop that is elsewhere in Clarendon. May I have the next slide, please? As far as planning guidance for this project, two key planning documents that guide and govern the transportation planning for this project include the document on the left. No, pardon me, I'm starting actually with the document on the right. The Master Transportation Plan with its multiple modal elements, the most recently adopted being the amended bicycle element from 2019. And secondly, the document on the left, the Clarendon Sector Plan. In April 2022, the Arlington County Board adopted an addendum to the Clarendon Sector Plan that focused specifically on the several blocks surrounding this site, intended to provide guidance to the 6 potential development sites in the focus area. It set forth a vision, excuse me, as well as guiding principles and design guidelines for the future direction of this neighborhood. The sector plan addendum was enshrined in a board-approved ordinance. May I have the next slide, please? The MTP bicycle element gave some specific guidance as well for this area. While no improvements or changes to the current configuration of 10th Street North, which is the item that was specifically outlined in the bicycle element of the MTP, no current changes to the configuration of 10th Street North are anticipated to be developed or delivered as part of this site plan project. County staff are requiring that all the site plans and other developments occurring along 10th Street North will maintain the existing curb line along 10th Street so that in the future, the county staff can use that consistent curb line to develop a uniform multimodal design. So you will see from this slide that both the MTP 2019 bicycle element and the Clarendon sector plan both recommend an enhanced bicycle facility along 10th Street North. In Arlington County's recently adopted capital improvement program, the county board has identified funding for a multimodal corridor study of Fairfax Drive and of 10th Street North. That study will evaluate potential options to include the enhanced bike facilities along both Fairfax Drive and 10th Street North, and it will develop recommendations for capital project investments. That funding is identified for the near term, which is the next fiscal year, 2024-2025. May I have, wait, one more thing. As part of its community benefit package, the developer is proposing to contribute $500,000 toward transportation improvements in the immediate vicinity of the project area, the vast majority of which would go toward this enhanced bicycle facility on 10th Street North. May I have the next slide, please? Additional planning guidance from the sector plan is that a new 10th Road North is proposed for the north side of the Joyce Motor site, and an alley proposed to be directly west of the site to provide access as well as to separate this site from the southern half of the Bingham Center, aka the Silver Diner site. And these are shown in brown in the image at right. And of course, both of those are being incorporated into this site plan project, which you will be seeing this evening. And on the next slide, please. Thank you. Other transportation recommendations from the Clarendon sector plan addendum include recommendations for the streetscapes, which specifically recommend sidewalk widths, and those sidewalk widths that are proposed for all of the streets surrounding the Joyce Motors site meet these sector plan guidance for the sidewalk widths, although no guidance is given for sidewalks for alleys or pedestrian pedestrian pathways, the applicant will be providing a 5-foot clear pedestrian pathway or sidewalk alongside the travelway of the alley. And next slide, which is on parking. There are 166 below-grade parking spaces proposed for the 241 residential units, of which 12 would be dedicated to visitor parking, which yields a residential parking ratio of 0.64 spaces per unit, which is within the residential parking guidelines established by the board in its 2017 guidelines for new multifamily buildings built within the metro corridors. This building, given its close proximity to the metro, is within the first tier and would qualify for the greatest reduction in parking allowed, which would be 0.2 spaces per unit. The retail vehicle parking is 1 space per 455 square feet, or 8 parking spaces for the 3,639 square feet of retail space. Additionally, surrounding the site, there will be, and is paid on-street parking available on 10th Street North and on North Irving Street adjacent to the site. And the next slide, please. The traffic consultant that was engaged by the developer has determined that even with this project, the addition of the 4 pipeline developments and regional growth, the signalized study intersections would continue to operate at an overall level of traffic service of C or better during both the morning and the evening peak hours, and that would be consistent with existing operations. And the consultant also has determined that each approach at the signalized intersections would also continue to operate at current levels of service, which are determined to be at level E or better during peak periods. Additionally, the consultant has determined that the approaches at the unsignalized study intersections would continue to operate at acceptable levels of service during the morning and the evening peak hour periods. With respect to queuing, the consultant sees very little change from the existing conditions. According to the consultant, the addition of the pipeline developments and regional growth would result in nominal increases, meaning 1 vehicle or less in the estimated 50th and 95th percentile queues. The peak hour queues would continue to be adequately accommodated. And according to the traffic consultant, the proposed development is estimated to generate 32 morning peak hour vehicle trips, 37 evening peak hour vehicle trips, and a total of 475 daily vehicle trips. The proposed site is estimated to generate approximately 187 morning peak hour person trips, 167 evening peak hour person trips, and a total of 1,849 peak hour person trips. These are non-auto trips and are in addition to the vehicle trips that are mentioned above. And in conclusion, may I have the next slide, please? We are recommending the following, that the commission approve the attached resolution that certifies the 14,700 square feet of GFA as transferable development rights from 1407 and 1411 North Garfield Street, which is the historic barbershop, for the purpose of historic preservation, that we approve the attached resolution transferring the 14,700 square feet GFA from 1407, 1411 Garfield Street, the sending site, to the site plan SPLN 19/06, aka SP 465, the receiving site, which is the project site in question, 10th and Irving, and then to adopt the attached ordinance for the site plan SPLN 19/06 SP 465 to permit construction of up to 5.87 FAR, including up to 184,714 square feet of residential GFA and up to 3,639 square feet of retail GFA located generally at 3201 10th Street North. I'm not going to read all these RPC numbers, with modifications of zoning ordinance requirements, including additional density, reduced parking and loading requirements, design requirements, density exclusions, and other modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance. I would now like to turn it over to Mr. Michael Haluski of the Real Estate Bureau, because he would like to show a couple of slides on the vacations. Then you will have the entire package that we are presenting to you for our recommendations. And then we will have the applicant give their presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Haluski, are you able
yes.
to share your screen?
I am. Just give me one moment. I can pull up my couple of slides. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Mike Haluski. I'm a real estate specialist with the Department of Environmental Services Real Estate Bureau. I'll just be very brief. Let me share my screen. As Mr. Sellen mentioned, we have apologies. We have two vacation areas that are associated with this project. There is a north-south alley that bisects this block running from Wilson Boulevard to 10th Street. There's a 2,931 square foot portion of this alley proposed to be vacated as part of this Joyce Motors project. The remainder portions of the alleys will be vacated as part of or proposed to be vacated as part of the Silver Diner Bingham Center project that's going through its public review right now. We can see that here on this plat. These are the grade areas. Also along North Irving Street frontage, there is an existing 1,000, I'll have to look it up very quick. I think it's 1,127 square foot portion of existing public street and utilities purposes easement. It's behind the back of curb. The applicant has also proposed to vacate this area and they will dedicate back the standard public sidewalk and utilities easements around their frontage. So we would recommend that the Transportation Commission find that the vacation of the 2,931 square foot portion of the 12-foot wide public alley located between Wilson Boulevard and 10th Street North, adjacent to 3240 Wilson Boulevard, 3211 10th Street North, 3201 10th Street North. Following Mr. Sellen's lead, I'll leave off reading the RPC numbers. And number two, the 1,127 square foot portion of a public street utilities easement on the west side of North Irving Street on the noted RPC numbers with conditions that those vacations are substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan, including the master transportation plan of Arlington County. I'm happy to answer any questions pertaining to the vacations as well. And I think with this, I would turn it back over to Mr. Sellen or to Mr. Cummings for the applicant.
Dennis, I'm ready. Mr. Sellen, I'm ready if you are. I'm going to go ahead.
Yeah.
Nicholas Cummings with Walsh Colucci here representing the applicant. So we're excited tonight to be presenting this project to you in the closing weeks of what has been a long process. We filed this application in October of 2019 before the county launched the study to update the Clarendon sector plan. And you saw some of those materials tonight from Mr. Sellen. I'm proud to say that the study, while lengthy, led to some significant improvements in the design and massing of the building. The study eliminated the taper line as a measurement of building height and amended height limits to allow more appropriate building heights along this dense corridor close to Metro Rail and other transit options. I'm joined tonight, like I said earlier, by members of our design and consultant team, including Wells & Associates, who will follow me in a more in-depth presentation on the transportation aspects of the project, but most importantly by our client or partners, a local firm with significant and extensive experience delivering high quality projects in Arlington and the region generally. A recent example of their work here in Arlington that you all may be familiar with is the Centro building on Columbia Pike. Or Partners is committed to delivering high quality housing for its tenants, but also to delivering equally high quality benefits to the neighborhoods it joins. And we see that in many aspects of the project before you today. I'll note too that this is not the last that you'll see of this team, and we're proceeding with some other projects that I think you're going to see in the future as well. So we're excited for that too. This project today proposes an 11-story residential building with 241 units and almost 4,000 square feet of ground floor retail. We're constructing a new alley and a new street connection through this block and providing a substantial community benefit package to earn density above the 3.0 FAR base for the site. Those benefits, just briefly, include on-site affordable housing, including some 3-bedroom family-sized units, which is critically needed in the counties. It's a huge contribution. Preservation and relocation of the historic Joyce Motors facade, construction of offsite curb extensions, $400,000 to future transportation planning efforts in Clarendon, which would be important, and $557,000 towards future public space and park planning efforts in Clarendon. So that's going to go a long way towards kicking off the process, most likely, for that new public park that was envisioned by the Clarendon sector plan study once we realized the fire station was not going to be able to move. So those are all some top level exciting aspects of this project. But with that, I'll turn it over to Grady Vaughn, who's there in the room with you with Wells and Associates, and he'll walk through some of the transportation focused elements of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thanks everyone for all the introductions. We're super excited to be here. I think there's been plenty of introduction here, so I'll just jump right into some of the information we have. So transportation is always a huge piece of these projects here in this urban core area of Arlington. And we've extensively been working with staff and their traffic team to first scope and develop our study and then continue to work together to make it the best project we can. On the first slide here, you'll see our site's proximity to the Clarendon Metro Station. We're just under 0.2 miles away, and we see that as a huge advantage and amenity to the retail patrons to the site. And in addition, you'll see there's several bus locations proximate to the site, one just adjacent to the site, and then a more robust system of bus routes located adjacent to the metro station. I don't think so. I guess in addition to the metro and bus routes, there's also a robust network of bike lanes and bike routes. There are several capital bike share stations in addition, the most proximate being at Wilson and Fairfax with 11 docks available, with several others also nearby if they're needed. The blue routes shown here are the on-street bike recommendations, and then there's also black routes shown, which are separated bike lanes that would be used to connect to the more regional facilities. The existing site is improved with an automobile parts and service station. As you can see, there's 4 existing entrances to the site that we propose to reduce with our new project to 2 locations. So as proposed, as has been described by many people, is 241 residential units and approximately 3,600 square feet of ground floor retail. As you can see here, so just to orient, this plan is shifted 90 degrees to the right. So north is now planned right here. So we have access off of North Irving Street to proposed 10th Road North, which is the new connection, and also off of 10th Street to the proposed alley. The loading and garage access are located on the alley, most proximate to the 10th Street connection. In addition, there's on-street parking provided on 3 of the adjacent sides, and we did do an auto-turn vehicle swept movement diagram analysis of the loading area, and the loading area will accommodate an SU-30 vehicle and an SU-40 vehicle, with SU-30s being the most typical residential move-in, move-out size truck. We find those to be adequate to serve the proposed uses. In addition, these are the pedestrian entrances to the building. You can see, again, this plan is turned to the right. So primary residential lobbies located most on the side most proximate to the metro station, and the retail entrances being up against the 10th Street retail corridor. The bike room access is on the proposed alley with direct access into the bike storage area, which I'll speak to a little bit more further in the presentation. Here shows how those entrances connect to the grid of sidewalks and pedestrian facilities. Adjacent to our site, there's a robust system of high visibility crosswalks, pedestrian signals, rapid flashing beacons, and other improvements. Each side of our site proposes a minimum of a 6-foot sidewalk, and with a 10th Street providing a wider 8-foot sidewalk. They also provide building zone areas or shy zones, and in addition to landscape areas, with the exception of the alley, which has the 6-foot sidewalk. You can see also on this graphic circled is the bike room with the direct access I mentioned previously, and also the Class 3 visitor spaces shown with stars here on some major pedestrian corners that we find will be usable for visitors to both the residential uses and the retail uses proposed. Diving in quickly here to our capacity analysis that was included in the transportation assessment. We scoped this thoroughly with Arlington County staff and determined that 12 offsite study intersections would be analyzed. All of those study intersections operate at level of service C or better during the AM and PM peak periods. And in addition to the existing conditions, we analyze both a background and future condition to isolate the impacts of our proposed site. So to develop our trip generation estimates, we first took into account the existing automobile parts and service station, and then the proposed residential and retail uses, ultimately determining a net increase of 29 AM peak hour trips and 34 PM peak hour trips. Both of those estimates include, or both of those peak hours include a substantial non-auto reduction, with 61% non-auto being applied to the residential uses and an 80% non-auto being applied to the retail uses. To take a conservative analysis of the future network, we also included a 0.5% growth rate on all major through movements, in addition to 4 approved but not completely constructed or occupied pipeline developments. These were scoped at the time that we collected the traffic data, so this was all added to those existing counts to make sure that we account for all those future developments. So with all of that background traffic, in addition to our proposed site, each of the study intersection continued to operate at acceptable level of service C or better. The proposed 10th Road North connection would enhance our circulation and access to our site and help to connect those multimodal facilities in the area. So speaking briefly to the non-auto reductions that I mentioned, we do propose a robust transportation demand management program, with the developer being extremely familiar with how these work and are ready to participate, fund, and implement these in coordination with the county. So speaking also to our parking and loading, as has been mentioned, we proposed 166 spaces for the residential and 8 spaces for the retail uses. That calculates to about 1 space for every 4 This one came on, I think. Alrighty, I'll try and get this before this one dies. So, the number that Dennis mentioned earlier excluded some of those visitor spaces that would be available to visitors of the site. To the bicycle parking, we do exceed the requirement for both Class 1 and Class 3 spaces. We propose to provide 100 Class 1 secure bicycle spaces in the bike room, in addition to 10 Class 3 bike spaces shown on the edges of the site. On the plan previously. For our loading, we propose one loading berth exclusive to the residential uses, and then one loading berth shared between the residential uses and the retail uses. So a little bit to the electric vehicle charging, we propose to install with the site 4% of the spaces minimum, with availability to up to 15% EV ready parking spaces. Another unique and pretty cool part of the project is that we do propose to install bicycle charging stations. So those would be included in the secure bike room. And then comparing that information to some sites that were recently approved and under construction in the area, the average approved parking ratio for those sites was 0.9 spaces per unit, and the average after some administrative updates to those projects is 0.75 spaces per unit. So we would still be lower than both of those, but we think we are providing an adequate amount of parking for the residents and retail users of our site. The 0.69 total parking supply would exceed the recommended minimum of 0.4 for our proximity to the metro shown on the map. The parking would be provided in a below grade garage accessed off of the new alley with 3 levels of structured parking. And to achieve these parking ratios, we would implement that transportation demand management plan that I described briefly previously. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you very much. Ms. Obukoya, we don't have any speakers on this item, do we? All right, great. All right, I have a potentially esoteric question here. It occurred to me as I was reviewing the information for this site yesterday that we had a project when I first started on the commission that did a very similar thing where it was transferring development rights from one of the cute little historic buildings in Clarendon to another development. And we had a member of the public and former transportation commissioner raise what I thought was a very important and interesting issue at the time, which was that by, transferring the development rights from that building, there was no expectation that that building would ever, redevelop or anything like that. And that particular building actually owned a portion of its own sidewalk. I believe it was what used to be Faccia Luna in Clarendon. And that property owner, a good chunk of that block, for instance, the public sidewalk was not actually owned or even had a public easement from the county. And that when we transferred development rights, if we didn't rectify that situation, we would probably never have an opportunity to rectify that situation. And so I just wanted to check if anyone has looked at something like that, make sure a similar issue doesn't exist with the Clarendon Barbershop building. Does the county, have appropriate easements or ownership and fee of the sidewalk and other transportation assets of that building that we're transferring development rights from?
It's an astute question. That was the case here, and I believe it's been rectified. Does Mr. Olewski want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings is correct. It's the exact scenario as you described, Commissioner, on the barbershop site. There's sidewalk in front of this particular site that is not currently subject to a public easement. So part of what was moving forward with the density credit action that is going, there's also a density credit not before the Transportation Commission that will go before the county board. There's a portion of that barbershop site currently that extends beyond the back of curb into the right of way. So it's only 13 square feet, but they're proposing to dedicate that. And then also the sidewalk area in front of the barber shop building itself, they're proposing to dedicate a sidewalk and utilities easement. So those will also be, those dedications will be actions before the county board as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Do other commissioners have questions? Commissioner Brose, I should have gone to you first. You are our rep on this SPRC.
It was. Thank you, Chairman Slett. I'll probably raise the same questions I raised at the SPRC. I did note because there was a response, I think, to the local civic associations that the retail parking has gone up, I believe, a little bit from the original proposal. So I think that's good for them. I feels like the parking ratio went up, and I'm still thinking this is a location which is so well positioned for public transportation that it could afford a lesser parking ratio. So I just want to bring that up again and ask where you guys ended up with that.
I'm happy to speak to the parking ratio. So we continue to work to right size that. We increased the parking supply during the SPRC process, thinking ahead towards potentially, leasing. Do we want more spaces? But obviously, it is expensive to build parking. And county policy here certainly would permit a lower parking ratio or support it more accurately. And obviously, there's shifting demand for parking spaces given the proximity to transit. So I wouldn't be surprised with this case if we sought or secured a reduction of parking in the future. And it's something that we'll continue to look at and discuss with the county, as those circumstances come up. So it is a good question, something we think about all the time.
I would support that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to note that the Red Top site, which is right, not too far from where you are, the building's under construction now. My understanding is after site plan approval, they came back to the county and asked and requested and were granted a reduction of one level of parking that they are not building. So just, others are doing something very similar.
Agreed. And that case was not without controversy at the time, though I have seen similar reductions go much more smoothly as there's been more support for smart growth and progressive thinking on that topic. So we're absolutely continuing to look at it and appreciate the comments.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the bike room and what kind of racks are in there? This is always a struggle. It's really hard to tell from the architectural plan if it's double stacks or single racks, or are they vertical or are they horizontal? Is there anyone who can speak to what that makeup is?
A member of the OR partner team here tonight might be the best for that, though Mr. Vaughn may be aware as well, but go ahead. First come, first serve on this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what type of racks are to be installed in the bike room. I'm not sure if anyone else has that sheet available.
If the client team doesn't have that tonight, it's certainly something we could follow up with if we get word from our architects on that. I don't know, Mr. Orr, if you wanted to say anything. Oh, there's Mr. Crosby.
Hi, this is Kevin Crosby with Antonovich Associates. I believe we have a combination of double stack and single bike racks. So along the wall, we have the wall mounted, and then in the interior of the room are the single bike racks.
Awesome.
So
That's
we
what
can,
it looked like to me.
we can
but
clarify those types.
Awesome. Yeah, we really like to see, at least a small percentage, like a 10% that aren't the double stacks, just for larger bikes and people who have trouble potentially getting their bike up into a rack. So that's fantastic to see. Appreciate it. Other commissioner questions or thoughts? Commissioner Lantelme, go ahead.
Yeah, one, and this is more for Mr. Sellon. The vacation issue, which is fine with me, is just I hadn't even realized that site had technically what are public alleys on them, because they essentially got taken over by the existing uses for car storage and the like. I've lived there for decades, and it never even occurred to me that there would be a public right of way going through that site. And that's all of it. It isn't just the ones that are being vacated, but the ones going right up Wilson Boulevard, back and over, because like I said, they were completely taken over by the neighboring buildings as their parking. So I assume that probably goes on in other places in the county. It's one of the things that gets frustrates me. We have a lot of public easements, public rights of way that nobody knows are public. So again, this is something I really would hope that with the MTP revision, we can deal with these sort of things.
Rewrite, MTP, rewrite.
I will tell you that in this situation, Commissioner Lantelmi, we are constructing and providing a publicly eased alleyway, street essentially. So that connectivity is being provided, and we'll build our section of the cross street as well. The Bingham Center, which is going to be in front of you soon enough. We'll build the rest of that cross street as well. So the situation will be much better on this block.
It will. I mean,
you
it's
are
a total
correct.
improvement. I have no complaint about any of these developers. You're actually improving it. There's going to be obvious rights of way that people will be able to walk on. They're not going to be easily converted over to private usage the way the existing situation is right now. So this is definitely directed to the county and not to the applicants at all.
Appreciated, and it is the situation all over the county.
Yeah, I mean, these are historical artifacts that we are correcting site plan by site plan. And I do understand that we are undertaking a amendment to or a reboot of the master transportation plan. I think we're having a listening session starting next week. So this is an element that we can bring up internally, but I appreciate that comment, Commissioner.
Great. Any other commission questions or comments? Commissioner Maradovic.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering if anybody could elaborate on the enhanced bicycle facility and when that might be coming on. It sounds like a pretty vague term. What exactly does that constitute? Because from the diagrams, it doesn't look like a protected bike lane. It looks like you would have street parking and then the bicycles passing by the street parking. So if somebody could clarify that a bit, thank you.
I will address it briefly. An enhanced bicycle facility does mean that it would be either a buffered or a protected bicycle facility. And the reason that it is just a line on a map at this time is that it has not yet been designed. I think at the time that the MTP was done in 2019, I don't think that we anticipated that we'd have this opportunity this soon for this project to come along to provide potential for an investment in 10th Street. And so when this project did come along, and we are delighted that the applicant is contributing $500,000 toward this, but because we do not have a design in place, we do not have anything further to say, will the median be remain? Will on-street parking remain? And that is why we have now put into the capital improvement plan for the county additional funding so that we can, in coordination with the community representatives and our staff and members of the bicycle advocacy community, develop a design for 10th Street that will not only accommodate this enhanced facility, but accommodate all of the other modes as well that we know 10th Street needs to serve. So at this point, it is still a line on the map, but we have committed funding, both from the county and from the development team for this future enhanced facility. And that is unfortunately all that I can tell you at this point, but it will be either buffered or protected.
Okay. Thank you. I hope I know that's down the road, but I hope that it will be protected because we see what happens in Crystal City right now. And follow up on Commissioner Lantelmi's comment about the privatization of public space. A lot of those bike lanes are pretty much unusable. So they exist as lines on the pavement, but not in reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, well, as we move toward a motion, I just wanted to say, I think this is a great project. I applaud the applicant. I applaud the SPRC. I'm really delighted to see the earmarking of funds for future improvements to 10th Street. That's great to see, as well as funds for future open space, because that was a huge topic of a conversation in the Clarendon Sector Plan update. And that's great to see. Also super excited for direct access to a bike room from outside. We love to see that. At ground level, we love to see that. Any building, you don't have to go down through the parking garage in order to get to the bike room is an improvement in my book. So this is pretty great. Seeing no final, emergency hands, I will attempt to craft a motion from this lovely amalgamation of board reports. I think I have them all. We'll see if I screw it up. If so, staff will tell me. So I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board adopt the certification of transferable development rights and also transfer the development rights from the Clarendon Barbershop building, as well as adopting the site plan. And furthermore, move that the Transportation Commission recommend the county board adopt the ordinance of vacation to vacate a portion of the 12-foot wide public alley, as well as a 1,127 square foot portion of public street and utility easement, as outlined in much more detail in our draft board reports dated January 18th, 2023.
Second.
Hopefully that's everything we were supposed to do. And no staff is freaking out at me, so I think we're good. Is there any discussion of that motion as seconded? All right, all those in favor, aye? Aye. All those opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the kind words about our development.
Thank you.
Ms. Herbst was writing a comment in the chat. Is there something that was missed
Oh, no.
on the vacations?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I think the
Consistency with the
vacations.
MTP?
Yeah, I think the finding from the Transportation Commission
Oh,
needs
gosh
to be
darn it.
that it's
That's always the
consistent
most
with
important bit.
the master
Oh.
transportation plan.
Go
One
right
last
ahead
bit.
and move it.
I move that the Transportation Commission find that the vacations that were just outlined, which are a 2,931 square foot portion of a 12-foot wide public alley and a 1,127 square foot portion of public street and utility easement are consistent with the comprehensive plan of Arlington County, specifically the master transportation plan.
Second.
That's been seconded. Any discussion of? Great. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously as well. Thank you. Always something.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Betsy Herbst to present on an ordinance to vacate a portion of a 12-foot alley running southwest from South Glebe Road towards South Lincoln Street along the parcel lines between Lot 9 and parts of Lots 1, 2, 12, and 13, Block 1, Alcova Heights, known as 3401 Columbia Pike in Arlington, Virginia, RPC number 23-041-007 with conditions. And I did read all of it. Oof, it's a lot.
Feel like somebody forgot to charge the mics. There we go.
Maybe, okay. There we go. Okay, yes, I'm Betsy Herbst with DES Real Estate Bureau. I'm here again with you tonight, a few times in a row here. Tonight, I am here to tell you about a project, the vacation of a portion of a 12-foot alley and a project at 3401 Columbia Pike. This particular project is coming to the board in February. It is a request by MCP3 Arlington LLC. who's the applicant, and it's to facilitate the construction of the form-based code project at 3401 Columbia Pike, which you may know it as the Bank of America site. Excuse me, it's at the intersection of Columbia Pike and South Glebe Road. The vacation of this portion of the alley will allow construction of the proposed 6-story mixed-use building, including 250 residential units, ground floor retail, and below-grade parking. The alley was originally dedicated in 1918, was later rededicated through several documents up until 1925. We have found no record that this alley was ever previously vacated prior to the construction of the existing bank building. And this is what you were referencing before, alleys that you never knew were alleys. But this is a paper alley that runs actually from South Glebe Road through to South Lincoln Street. The portion that the applicant is requesting to vacate is the area shown in yellow on the screen. Alleys, as you have mentioned tonight, are not identified as streets on the master transportation plan. They're not shown on the MTP, but they are considered public rights of way for pedestrian and vehicular passage. As far as we know, the alley has not been used for alley purposes since at least the construction of the bank building. And in conclusion, I recommend to the Transportation Commission that you find that the proposed vacation of a portion of a 12-foot alley running southwest from South Glebe Road towards South Lincoln Street along the parcel lines between Lot 9 and parts of Lots 1, 2, 12, and 13, Block 1, Alcova Heights is substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan, including the Master Transportation Plan of Arlington County. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Herbst. Commissioner Lantalve.
I don't have a question, but I renew my comments from Joyce Motor about the privatization of public rights of way.
My only thought is a little surprised we're not declaring this alley a historic resource for Arlington County. 1918, we don't hear that number very often around here. Any other commissioner comments, whether joking or serious, or questions? All right, let's see if I can get this right. So all we really need to do is find that it's in accord with the MTP. All right, then I'll stop doing the other stuff that's not us. All right, I move that the Transportation Commission find that the proposed vacation of a portion of a 12-foot alley is substantially, oh, look at that, is substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan, including the Master Transportation Plan of Arlington County, Virginia, as outlined more specifically in our draft board report.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Any concerns with that motion, Ms. Herbst? Okay, great. All right, all those in favor? Aye, opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Next, we have performance parking pilot and residential permit parking occupancy monitoring study with Melissa McMahon.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Excellent. See how long it lasts. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's been a little while. I'm excited to bring to you a couple presentations. The first is about a new project that the parking team and really a much broader DES collaborative is bringing forward. It's a 3-year project called Performance Parking in commercial corridors. Some of you might recall that you probably saw this in the form of a grant a couple years back. This is a Virginia Department of Transportation Innovation and Technology Transportation Fund grant that's allowing us to do this work. The main purpose of this presentation tonight is to introduce you to the project, share our overall project and engagement timelines, and answer questions that you might have about the project at this stage. It is a 3-year project, so we're not going away anytime soon, and there are definitely different stages of it that I look forward to describing to you. First off, I wanted to ground us in the MTP. The original grant request and the spirit of this project is in fulfillment of MTP parking and curb space element policy 5. Utilize parking meter pricing strategies. It's gonna, I think it might pop on and off. We'll see. That vary by hour and location to better match parking availability and demand. So this project will test one approach to using pricing to manage demand. And keep pressing the button. There are other ways to go about this, but this is a solution that was procured to solve for this, to give us a chance to test something out. The purpose of this project is to improve the user experience with metered parking spaces on the curb in our 2 key commercial and multifamily residential corridors. To make metered parking spaces more available more often. To share useful information about parking options in real time for folks who are using those spaces, and to reduce the negative impacts associated with the search for metered parking. So this could be cruising, double parking, going somewhere else to do business. So there's an array of experiences we all have trying to find parking spaces on the curb. Before I leave that slide though, I do want to mention what this project does not do. This project does not seek to increase overall parking revenue. And we might hear that as a question from the community as we go forward. That is not a goal of this project. And it's not even necessarily an outcome that we will see. It does not increase, is not anticipated to increase all metered parking rates across the board. So what we're going to see with occupancy information is areas where metered parking may be underutilized and areas where it's overutilized. And by tweaking prices up and down, that's how we're going to shift demand to other parts of town. We also are not anticipating decreasing the number of reserved ADA accessible parking spaces. So those spaces on the street are part of our metered parking inventory. As you probably know, they pay the same rates that everyone else does in our flat rate system that we have today. They are a part of this project. So we're going to be putting the occupancy sensors in them and we are going to learn about them, but we're not going to be decreasing their availability. And in fact, we might learn more about their varied availability to customers depending on where they are in town. And finally, I wanted to mention that this is not a project that creates dynamically or fast changing pricing a la a hot lane. That's not going to happen here. We anticipate not changing pricing more than once a quarter because what we need to do is establish a price that everyone understands. People use that price structure. We gather occupancy information about it and we see what impact it has. So there is a period within which period of what we're anticipating is roughly 2 years that we're going to be changing pricing no more than once a quarter. But at the end of those 2 years, we'll have learned something about what I'll call either an optimal pricing structure or at least how the pricing is influencing where people choose to park. This slide gives you a sense of where we're implementing the project. This is only the Roslyn, Ballston, and Richmond Highway corridors. There's a lot going on in those corridors too, so I'll just put a caveat out there. We're not going out and putting the technology into the ground that's then going to be immediately dug up by a construction project. We're doing a lot of coordination with the paving schedule, active right-of-way projects that the county is undertaking, as well as the sort of construction pipeline and active projects from the private sector that might be influencing those spaces. And after the completion of this 3-year project, if it's a success, if we're learning a lot from it, if the community is finding this kind of occupancy data of use, we have an opportunity to expand the application of the technology. For instance, this project is just on-street metered parking spaces, the potential for a few areas of off-street space, but these are our metered parking spaces. We have other curb space uses that could benefit from occupancy information that's more detailed. For instance, our loading areas, short-term pickup drop-off areas. And so those are not a part of this study today, but they could be something we could apply this technology to in the future. I want to give you a little sense of the technology that we're using. One critical piece are these stall occupancy sensors. This is a small device. They core drill a small hole in the center of a parking space. They drop this little sensor in and cover it over with epoxy. So you can kind of see the final outcome. It's just a little black dot on the parking space. We do have to delineate spaces for this project. We don't do that as a standard today, so that will be new, something new people will see on the street, new lines separating parking spaces. It's necessary to make this kind of occupancy detection the most efficient possible and the most accurate possible. Otherwise, the cars might not be over the sensors. But that's the extent of how we know if a car is there or not. And that's all this sensor does. This isn't camera technology. It's just car yes, car no. And with that car yes, car no, we also get duration of stay. How long is the car sitting there? And that's going to be pretty cool because that's going to help us know if a 2-hour meter is being used for 2-hour blocks of time, or if it's being used for 4-hour blocks of time, or if it's being used for 10-minute blocks of time, because we'll have that information from these sensors. The second key piece of technology that's a part of this project are wireless gateways. These are what communicate the data from the sensors to the cloud. While there's a sensor in every space, and our network at build out will be about 4,500 parking spaces in these corridors, the wireless gateways are fewer and farther between, and they will by and large be mounted to existing traffic signal poles and other infrastructure that ideally the county owns. So we are in the process of designing that network so that we get optimal coverage with the least amount of infrastructure possible. These gateways use low power, very low power, both the sensors and the gateways. These are designed to last for like 10 years without touching them. They're not rotating batteries out every month or so. So we can put these up on a traffic pole and ideally not touch it again for a really long time. The radio frequency approach to this is a wide area, low wavelength. This is a utility frequency, essentially, so we don't have to pay extra to get access to this frequency. The overall approach to the project. I alluded to this a moment ago. This is basically an iterative process. The first year, which is starting now, is a combination of public outreach and education on what the project is, equipment installation, and getting the system up and running. And then we are going to gather data. So ideally, we get into a fully operable sensor system. We're using that data to understand occupancy. We are starting to communicate with the community about what that might mean for how pricing could influence how the spaces are being used on the street. And then we are able to implement changes in a pricing structure to test what we're seeing and to see if we can get better, to see if we can achieve essentially the goals of the project. So making the parking easier to find, making it more convenient for folks relative to what they were experiencing before. And with each change in price that we implement, we collect new data, we look at how it's performing, we make some more changes. And so that's this roughly every 3-month cycle. It could be less often depending again on the nature of the data and what we're seeing. So we are in year 1. We are at project launch. We are just about, with this meeting really, starting our public education and engagement process. The goal of this stage of the process is continuing on the back end to do our system planning, the logistics, the permitting processes so that we can get hardware deployed on the street. But on the front end of what the public is seeing, making sure people are aware of the project, that they get their questions answered, they have some understanding of the technology and the goals, and also so that we get some feedback from the public on prioritization of goals. So there might be people who are more price sensitive. There might be people who are more convenience sensitive. There might be feedback from the business community about a concern relative to their customers' parking access and the kinds of features of the customer experience that are related to them. So one of the key features of our outreach is it's business forward. We're starting there because these metered parking spaces are by and large in front of a lot of business activity. And they're going to be a lot of the people who have questions first. So in winter and early spring, which is what we're beginning now, in addition to our software planning, we are actually implementing a demonstration site. And that demonstration site is the Courthouse Plaza parking lot. So we started trying to put some equipment in last weekend. There were some logistical hiccups this weekend. There will be people out there. They'll be closing the lot on Sunday, and they'll be installing these sensors. The goal of that demonstration site is to be able to put up and provide to the public a glimpse at what the system is going to be able to offer us by way of data, what it will look like on the interface side of things, and even for people to be able to walk by and see what the sensors look like installed in the ground, to just, again, get a little more of a sense of things as we move forward. By and large, this, even though there's technology in this project, the technology is not the customer experience. The technology is how we understand the data. There is as an end result, customer available data interface where they can see availability of parking too. So it's not just that the prices will change, but that people will be able to access through APIs and web interfaces that we provide, or potentially third parties do, the visibility of access to parking as well. So we're hoping that the demo site helps to illuminate a little bit of that, get people's taste buds ready for it, so to speak, and generate more questions. And we are already starting with this meeting and through February and March, engaging our business stakeholders and stakeholder groups with the project. In early to mid-spring, we move into major hardware deployment. So throughout all of these corridors, and we continue public engagement as well as we're rolling out the sensors in the corridors, we're doing door-to-door awareness in advance with the businesses that are fronting those spaces, so that when they see us close down parking for short periods of time, they don't have to feel alarmed because they've actually been greeted in advance, letting them know what they're seeing happening on the street. So that's what happens in our late spring into summer. Those businesses are being greeted. We are experiencing short-term parking closures as we roll through and do these really quick sensor installations. And basically, again, answering a lot of questions and trying to keep the project moving as quickly as we can. And then once all those sensors and gateways are installed, we're from the summer through the fall and winter, we are collecting data. We're calibrating and testing our software. We're testing conceptual pricing scenarios, and we're measuring the anticipated impacts and sharing what we're seeing with the community before we make any changes. No changes in pricing can happen until we come forward to the board with an ordinance. Right now, as you're probably familiar, the ordinance about parking meter prices is a hard-coded thing. So we can't mess with them until the board says, these are the parameters within which you can change them. So our target is to have those data, have had a community conversation about pricing scenarios, and then to go to the board with a really sensible request for a period of time, so to date certain, in which we need permission to administratively change prices. So what we envision is that ordinance will allow us from roughly January 1, 2024 until 2 years out to do this up to quarterly kinds of changes and communicate with the community on it, with the goal of reaching the end of that testing period with a much greater understanding of how these things interact and another follow-up request for an ordinance. And I can't even tell you what that second ordinance will look like because I'm not sure what we're going to learn yet. So I also want to make sure that you heard from us right now about our engagement plan and the goals that we have for it. So the engagement plan for this project is robust. We are talking about doing as inclusive a process as possible for the folks who are going to experience this and who are using these metered parking spaces, and making sure that we get tailored feedback at each stage of the process. So I mentioned that right now it's feedback on the prioritization of these project goals. This isn't a, are we doing the project or not kind of engagement, because we are doing the project. It's a fully funded 100% grant. There's no county, there's not even a county dollar bills on the table here. This is an opportunity that's provided by the state's interest in innovation and technology for us to learn a lot about the things that are happening here on the ground. But we do need to make sure that everyone is weighing in now on what those priorities are for an outcome. And that could be everything from the types of pricing changes in the future to what the board's priorities should be vis-a-vis bringing in money for parking and making parking available, accessible, and convenient to folks. So we want to make sure that we know now parkers are understanding how the system will influence them in the future, how they're going to have access to information through the system, and how we're going to be using these data to inform pricing changes going forward. Our target audiences, I mentioned businesses and the organizations along the corridor are our first assault, so to speak, on our engagement plan roadshow, and reaching our parkers. So our engagement plan includes the boots on the ground in terms of outreach folks on the corridors themselves, in the businesses, talking to customers of the businesses as well as those business employees. We have plans to have decals, I might not be using the right term, but right on the multimeters, because people who are parking at the spaces will be able to see there's a project that relates to their use of the meter, and they can quickly access our website, which is up and available, and look for opportunities to engage in the outreach. We already have a virtual public meeting scheduled, and that's for February 23rd. And in that public meeting, everybody's invited, and I'll be giving a presentation much like tonight's, but with anyone being able to ask questions online to get that education out there, and also to start to get that feedback from the community on their relative priorities. Later in the process, we will be trying to reach our third-party app developers. So we want data like this to transform not just into something that the county has to manage, but something that third parties will be able to take up and use in their applications. So maybe all we have to provide is a data feed, and others can think creatively about how parkers can use it. I also wanted to highlight that we're looking at our engagement in terms of the demographic groups that we can reach, and making sure that as we go through, we're collecting information so we can get a sense of the distribution of who's participating in the process, essentially. So who are we reaching at each stage? Who's answering online feedback form? Who's attending our meetings? And these last slides are about our engagement overview, and I think I've covered a lot of it. So this first phase, getting everyone familiar with the project and the overall schedule and insights into the public's priorities. So I have stakeholder meetings scheduled. We're providing a virtual public meeting, an online feedback form, and these pop-ups in the corridors, as well as our demonstration site. As we transition to the installation phase for the major, for the bulk of the technology system, we will be doing door-to-door outreach as that phases through. So as you kind of imagine, every street on the corridor that we're hitting, we'll have a street team out there knocking on the doors of those businesses in advance to make sure that they know we're coming and what it's going to look like. So that's the overview of where we are today. Provided a link to our website. You can just go to the county homepage and put in performance parking, and this will be right up there at the top. The search works really well on the website, and my contact information is here, as well as our engagement core folks. We're really excited about it and happy to take questions or comments, what you're thinking at this time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to lead off just because I have a long history with this project. I just checked in my email. The first reference I can find to performance parking is a 2014 conversation with then Commissioner Mike Perkins. And then the first official communication I can find to the board was a letter in 2015 when the board was raising parking meter prices just to close a budget gap and not for anything to do with parking utilization, pushing for performance parking. So it's been a long time coming, but it's fantastic to see. And I'm excited for this to move forward. So with that said, Commissioner Lantalme, go ahead.
Yes, it's nice to see that Professor Shoup's, the high cost of free parking we're finally moving in that direction here. So I'm, very enthusiastic about this, even though it seems to be a bit baby step. Ultimately, I'd love to see dynamic pricing. We referred to San Francisco, and I thought they were more on the dynamic pricing side of things rather than this sort of checking every 3 months and it's the same price all the time. Am I wrong on that, or?
No, there are variations, and in some areas it can be more dynamic, and it could in the future for us. But right now, the goal is to learn what the patterns are, because at some level, there's a different kind of transparency that you get, and not everybody is parking with an app. Not everybody is going to have that
Right, and I get that.
real time.
Yeah,
Yep.
so I have no problem with us moving in this direction and gathering information. I think that's absolutely appropriate.
Yep.
When we do set the prices the first time after gathering information, I understand it won't be dynamic, but would we be able to do pricing that varies during the day so that, let's say in the morning, it would be virtually nothing, or midday, but in the evening in like Clarendon would be way higher. Whereas other areas, the middle of the day would be the highest prices and it would tail off in the mornings and the evenings. So could we have something like that?
Yep, absolutely. That is what we envision to be able to understand through the really detailed occupancy information. So yes, because that doesn't have to dynamically change. But what it would change is someone would know if I'm parking in Clarendon, these are the cheap hours, these are the higher priced hours because of the nature of the use of that neighborhood.
Okay, excellent. That goes a long way to help best utilize that public resource, which parking is. When we do the public engagement, the only thing I guess I can warn you about, or I'm a little cynical on how public reaction goes. The driving public, the same way that they always want an extra lane on the road to be built, they'll always want free parking, and you're going to get that. And it doesn't matter how much you explain it, it's going to be, we want to park for free, or we don't want it to go up any higher than it already is for any reason.
Yep.
I want it cheap as possible. So just be aware that that's going to happen. And I know when you come back to us and you're reporting these things, I will not be surprised if it says that, and it will not change my opinion that this is a great project to go forward with. So anyway, I just want to sort of warn everybody that I'm afraid that's what we're going to see when we get the public reaction, or at least the driving public reaction. So thank you.
Commissioner Moravic?
Yeah, I was just looking at the extensive public engagement plans you had, and I was thinking about methodologically how it might work, because this is essentially a data collection exercise, and then you have like the Hawthorne effect. When people know they're being observed, will their behavior change? So this might be a scenario where it might be better to have less public engagement. I know that's not the popular thing to say, but and I mean also it's like 2 years is can be a long time. The context on the street can change, the demand can change. There's going to be projects that are done, that are completed, that'll create more demand. So I mean, I don't envy the people that set this up methodologically, because it seems kind of like a hard thing to do. So that was just my comment.
Commissioner Bros?
Yeah, I had a sort of similar reaction. I was interested. I think the customer engagement is something that Arlington County has spent a lot of time developing. And I think in my first instinct was sort of the same. If you tell people what you're doing, then they're going to adapt their behavior to adjust to that. But I think you also, by telling them, again, I think it's the right idea, because otherwise you get rid of these conspiracy theories about what's going on the pavement. But I'm also sort of interested. In full disclosure, I don't have a car, so I don't do a lot of parking. But what do you think the stakeholder priorities might? I mean, what do you anticipate those types of things might be?
Well, we actually, and this actually speaks a bit to Mr. Lanselmi's comment. It will be interesting to see how the stakeholders have a discussion and a thoughtful process around their competing interests, because we know that while I would love free and convenient parking, free and right in front of the place that I'm going, but we can't actually get both. They're quite in conflict with one another. So we expect to hear those competing interests and to hear a conversation around them. So our hope is that out of the list of related but slightly different priorities for the curb, that we get to hear a little bit more, and it might even pan out to be neighborhood by neighborhood, piece of of corridor by corridor, some sense of what are the biggest priorities. Is it convenience and reducing cruising and search costs that's the most important? Are people willing to pay a premium for that? And how far are people willing to walk to get to their location? Is it a block? Is it 2 blocks? How far out of sight? We do think that having better data about availability, if you've got an app that can tell you your space is only 2 blocks from your destination, even though you wouldn't have thought to turn there, that kind of thing could make a big difference, and they save money. So they can actually pay less maybe than today and walk a short distance to their destination. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation in that respect, because it's putting it all on the table. We have options, and we can use this to target the outcomes that are of most interest to folks.
Yeah, it looks like a really cool data gathering project.
Commissioner Shannon.
Yeah, I did a quick search. I was curious about, it's a little tongue in cheek, but I think I'd be curious to see these in bike lanes, how many times someone parks in a bike lane and how long they're in a bike lane.
Duration of stay.
And actually, I brought up an article here. Activists count 300 vehicles blocking 3 bike lanes on one day, and there's a post from along the pike. But no, I appreciate this. I think with the API, would the underlying data also be publicly available on the analysis side, or would that still not be part of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak yet because I haven't really seen how our software will produce data yet, but we're going to have the data to analyze, and we're going to have a couple different dashboard tools that come out of this, some that are staff facing and some that are public facing. So we're still learning a bit about what that's all going to look like and what format that will all be in, but ultimately it's for the good of understanding, and there isn't a protection around that. So if we can make the data available in data sets that are useful to folks for analysis, we'll do that. The most useful application that we can think of is an API that provides it live, that others who are developing apps can use to actually push out to customers who are just regular parkers rather than people who are doing data analysis. But I think we'll have it in several forms ultimately.
Well, thank you. And then with the analysis of parking, I know you said, talking about shifting demand from one side to the other, would there be any desire to look at thresholds if parking usage is so low, possibly using that as reasons to eliminate parking in some areas if there isn't high use?
So in a sense, that's always a possibility. One of the things that I think might come up that's sort of related to that, but I'll just put it in terms of, we have many competing interests in the curb. And so if we see in some areas that it's high demand parking, but we're talking about 10-minute turnover in a 2-hour spot, the staff recommendation that comes out of that might be turning it into 15-minute parking space, which we don't use as metered space. We do it for free, but really to accommodate and prevent the kinds of double parking activity that we see on Crystal Drive, which I bike through as part of my commute. And so it will be a tool in that way. We will definitely be able to learn. I don't know that we have spaces that we just wouldn't have for parking unless there was a better, higher and better use for it, if that makes sense, because we want to make sure the curb is available for various uses. But it could get shifted according to what we're seeing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like another use we're always looking for, right, is like sometimes we have this like, where do the tour buses go? And where can you park things like that? And often they're willing to go out of their way a bit. So if we find there's some block that has just not enough parking demand for a meter, maybe that's a place that can be designated tour bus parking or things like that. I did also want to say, Commissioner Lantoni, that SF Park adjusted parking rates every 8 weeks. It was not, demand responsive in a surge pricing sort of way. Yeah, please.
As part of the outreach, you mentioned you're going to all the retailers along those streets, which is great. They really need to be brought in and sat down and talked through. And my understanding is from other cities that have gone through this, the retailers generally are just totally opposed to the whole idea. They hate it, they hate it, they hate it until it's implemented. When it's implemented, they end up loving it because it works. And their customers can actually park and get in. But it takes the experience for them to really fully appreciate it. So I would not be surprised if you're going to run into a lot of resistance from the retailers, because it is it's almost a counterintuitive concept for a lot of people.
Right.
So be prepared for that sort of resistance.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the things that we like about at least the design of the rollout of this is that no one is going to see any changes for a while. So we've got time both to work with them to help give them the tools to understand the principles, but also we will have a period in which we can collect data and talk about scenarios and the ways that those might influence behavior before we even start making changes. So we are hoping that this is a case of bringing people on board and over communication that will hopefully get us with them coming along with us.
Will you be talking to the bids?
Yeah.
Because getting them on board, they'll get it. I'm pretty sure the leadership of the bids will understand this really quickly and got on board. I think that could be a really useful tool to reaching, getting a consensus and reaching the retailers. Because the work I've done with the bids, they get this sort of thing. They really do understand it.
Yep.
So definitely work closely with them.
Thank you.
I just had
Go
one.
ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, just one quick question. You mentioned tour buses, but have there been any considerations or will there be any inclusion for kind of commercial vehicles within the pilot, or is it mostly focused on?
So it covers all of our metered parking spaces, and where we have metered tour bus parking, which we do have, that's actually included in this initial pilot. Spaces that we don't currently meter for parking, such as loading zones, pickup drop off, those are not currently included.
Okay.
And that's where we might see expansion in the future if we find that this is useful data and the system works.
Yeah, I was specifically wondering about, single unit box trucks, vans, delivery vehicles, which are becoming increasingly prevalent.
Yeah, and admittedly, because this technology solution doesn't include cameras, we won't know what kinds of vehicles are parking in the spaces. We'll just know their relative occupancy. And then we might be able to, it's part of sort of, as we're gathering data, if we see areas of metered sort of 2 or more hour metered parking that have a lot of turnover, we can also do some spot checks and see if that turnover is because we've got a bunch of box trucks and other things like that doing loading activity in what would normally be a metered space. And that would be a learning experience for us. But we certainly don't with this technology know what kind of vehicle it is.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Ms. McMahon before we let her go?
And I do, well, and I have another piece of a
Okay.
presentation here. So I know we just talked about one topic and I'm here for 2 if you've got time.
Bring it.
I wanted to also make sure that you didn't miss the fact that last summer we did a follow-up data collection effort from the RPP review. So back in 2016, 17, 18, 19-ish, there was data collected for that process to understand the occupancy of both RPP spaces, so residential permit parking program spaces on street, those blocks, relative to metered and unregulated space. And what we did this past year was a follow-up study that included new measurements of residential permit parking program streets. So it didn't include those other types, but this was another look in at how these streets were performing. And we did two types of data collection. One was a census of Ballston. So that's all of the RPP streets that sort of fall into that neighborhood. And then a statistical sampling approach, stratified sampling of the other neighborhoods that had been sampled in the past. So this is a super short presentation. I'm going to hit the highlights for you, but if you're interested in more detail, the full reports are online, and we can come back with more at a later time. But I wanted to make sure that we didn't let this get too old before we brought your attention to it. So in the Ballston census approach, this was to expand on the previous on-street parking study that was implemented for the RPP review. We collected and analyzed parking occupancy and duration data to understand the on-street parking demand on RPP restricted streets in Ballston. This was a full census count of all RPP restricted facilities, 171 in total. And there's going to be a map in a moment. Make sure that my notes pages are keeping up with me here. And we didn't evaluate the other management types in this particular instance. So this is a quick picture of the areas that were studied, and those, so there's the Ballston area kind of highlighted in total, and the streets that are dark are the streets that we collected data on. This was a Thursday and Saturday in April of last year using a license plate reader technology. So all of these data were collected using LPR drive-bys that we had to then sometimes do over if they didn't do a good job the first time. There was a lot of data cleaning in this process. The routes were driven to capture each desired facility every 2 hours a day between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. And so this gave us a total of 2,296 occupancy observations for this area, which represents about 14 observations for each facility. And a facility is like a block face. You can kind of envision it that way. For the other sampling approach, this is the other neighborhoods that were studied last time. Same idea, same purpose. The main difference was that we did, instead of a census, a stratified sampling because there's just so much ground to cover, essentially. This is a depiction of those sampled areas, and so you can see they kind of hit on different parts of the county, and there's a lot of streets to cover. So in this case, these data were collected in April and May of last year. This was every 3 hours between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., providing a total of 7,160 occupancy observations, which represents about 8 observations per facility. And all of these LPR data were heavily post-processed to remove erroneous entries. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the technology, but essentially the camera is capturing the presence of these vehicles as it goes by, and sometimes it finds vehicles on driveways or side streets or a vehicle in a travel lane that's not actually parked. And there's a lot of checking back against the pictures and then the data to see if it was correct or not. Pretty time consuming, actually. But out of all of that, it's a useful touch point. So the key findings were that the majority of observations on these RPP facilities showed occupancy of less than 85%, with many at 60% or less. And the benchmarks here are that we were using groupings of percentile ranges, 0 to 60, 61 to 85, and over 85. These are because 60% in the MTP is considered the threshold at or below which the voluntary removal of off-street surface parking in excess of zoning requirements is recommended. Basically, those are underutilized streets, and you don't need to have extra off-street parking if the street is empty. 85% represents a good rule of thumb for a well-utilized street block that's not dysfunctional. So you can find a space on it, and so you're not circling the block, but it's not underutilized either. So we really want to see the data to fall in between 60 and 85% and not over 85%. So in Ballston, 14% of all observations on RPP streets showed occupancy higher than 85%, but a majority of those were outside of RPP enforced hours. So also, you're probably familiar, RPP is not all day long, and depending on the location, it's in the daytime to prevent like commuter parking there all day, and at nighttime to prevent evening activities, from keeping people from finding parking spaces. So that's generally, it's we want to see RPP working. And that's what this is showing us, is that when it's controlled, we're seeing fewer over-occupied facilities. In the other study areas, between 2 and 7% of all observations showed occupancy higher than 85%. Less than 1% on those RPP less than 1% reached that threshold on the facilities during their restricted hours. And so in a majority of study areas, the mean occupancy either decreased or stayed the same compared to the previous study year. So compared to the data that we collected back during the RPP review. And the major exception was actually Columbia Pike, where the management type had changed from RPP to unmanaged. And we actually saw the occupancy increase there, which would be as expected. And that, sorry, I think my screen is still, there we go. So those are the highlights that I wanted to share without getting into too much technical detail. But I think it's important, it's follow-up we commit to as a part of the process of managing the program. And it does indicate that the RPP regulations are doing what they're expected to do. And we're happy to bring back more detail if it's something you're interested in hearing more about in the future.
Thank you so much. Are there commissioner questions on this particular item? Commissioner Lantelmi.
It's more, I'm not surprised that Ballston had some streets that outside the hours are 85% above, 85 or above. That when we've done SBRCs in that area, that comes up. And it's been a common observation by that civic association. And I've seen it myself when I've gone through there. It's like, yeah, those streets are really pretty packed. It's people coming back from work. And that's when they park, because it's outside the 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 hours of the RPP for them, which covers most of that. So, that, again, that doesn't surprise me. It would come up depending on how missing middle gets implemented. If it does, this could very well come up when requests for different sizes and how the parking is adopted by the county. So this study is very timely. When was this done? Was it, I may have missed that, you may have said it. Was it pre-pandemic or?
This was post, well, whatever post means, but this was data collected in the summer, late spring of last year, and then synthesized. And so we have it now in the
We
report.
still have a lot of people working from home that would be leaving their cars on the street. And even then we had very low utilization in a lot of areas.
Yep.
So that's it. That's interesting to know.
Yep.
So we did actually have some observations where RPP occupancy was higher than 85 during RPP enforced hours.
Yep. I'll go quick back to that slide, but it looks like less than 1% in the sampled neighborhoods. And I don't have the actual specific sub number in the Ballston census.
But probably 5 or 6 or something like that %, maybe.
Yeah, and I encourage you to explore the full report, because there are maps for every time point in the neighborhoods. And what you can see is it's color coded. So the segments, the facilities that stay are color coded by those percent amounts. So you can see the ones pop out in one color when they go over the 85%. And one of the things that I think is an exciting opportunity with data like this is we could use it to say, hey, if that block face, let's call it underperforming block face, we can go and see, we can collaborate with the PSAs, see what's going on there, because it could be a combination of things. It could be people parking who are not permitted, and it's an enforcement sort of target issue. But it also could be that there are households that happen to own a lot of cars, because again, each of these facilities are small potentially. They may only hold a few cars, and when it's full with just a few cars. But if you have a household with several and no off-street parking, which is not common in the RPP program, but it does exist, it could lead to some of those peak activities on those blocks. But as a system, RPP is definitely performing in that we can keep using the street range, which is good for the folks who are joining the program. We are just starting to get some new petitions now out of everything was put on hold during the review. And I think people are starting to come out of COVID and think, okay, what are the things that we can do together to make the streets perform better? And so those petition efforts would, based on these data anyway, potentially result in improved performance on their streets if there's an actual problem there today.
Great. And where can we find the full report? All we got in our briefing materials was this this slide deck.
Let me follow up with a link, because I'm pretty sure if you Googled RPP occupancy study on I say Googled in that very generic way, but searched in the search box at the top of the web page, you'd find it.
Okay.
It's going to be out at the parking pages, but I don't have the link in the slide deck. You're right.
You got it. Great. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have Arlington Transit ART Zero Emissions Bus Study with Carly Macias from HDR. We have Kimberly Horn Consultants, and we have several county DES leadership staff on hand as well. That would be Mike Moon, Greg Emanuel, and Wei Wong. Also, we have some other staff members that I need to mention here, and they are Demetra McBride and Pierre Holloman.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, do we know who's driving the deck?
And I'm happy to
sorry.
share the presentation if you need it.
So I guess I thought Katie was, but I can pull it up real quick if you need me to, Demetra.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm so sorry, Carly. I didn't realize that Katie wasn't going to be here.
Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay, we'll dive into it quickly. We deeply appreciate the Commission's time and attention to the county's carbon neutral transportation efforts, both near and long term. The ARPBUS feasibility study is intended to inform phases of decision-making that will decarbonize the movement of people, services, and goods in and through Arlington County. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the scope and schedule of the ARPBUS Zero Emissions Vehicles feasibility study. Staff has worked with consultants Kimberly Horn and HDR to model and develop near-term recommendations, beginning with the replacement of 15 end-life cycle NABI buses that are currently on an inoperability threshold. Ultimately, the study seeks to strike a balance among county priorities, including continuity, quality, and reliability of service, attainment of our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, measurements that include cradle-to-grave factors and externalities, operational schedules and capacities for the AMOF and our BEB, that's battery electric bus charging infrastructure, resiliency planning to test the potential for a diversified fleet that adapts to critical challenges, and furtherance of equity commitments to transit-dependent populations. Next slide. Coming before you in the not too far distant future are integrated and crosswalked efforts. This includes actually the new title is the Carbon Neutral Transportation Master Plan for Arlington County. The DEC Trans Plan will provide a strategy for lowering our emissions. It's going to cover county fleet vehicles, privately owned vehicles, and commercial vehicles. Very importantly, it's going to have a master strategy, a 5-year strategic plan, and also, very importantly, the charging infrastructure master plan that will be countywide. In addition, The Department of Transportation has also been conducting zero emissions bus pilot program, partnering with numerous bus manufacturers in the ZEB or BEB, battery electric bus marketplace. These are the 4 that they reached out to. These are the results. But again, the full detail and full data from those studies will be shared with you shortly. And with that, thank you, Carly, for driving the deck, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Demetra. And again, I'm Carly Macias. I'm with HDR, kind of presenting to you tonight some of the initial results. We were going to start with kind of we like to call it Zero Emission Bus 101. Because we're short on time, I might just speed through this and you all can ask questions if you'd like to. So I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. Please stop me if you want to talk about anything. So just to kind of start us out, we wanted to get everyone on the same page in terms of the different bus types. So a diesel bus and a CNG bus both run off of fuel. Obviously, one's using diesel, one is CNG. It has an internal combustion engine. A battery electric bus and a hydrogen fuel cell bus actually have a lot in common with each other. So a battery electric bus has a larger battery that powers an electric engine. And a hydrogen fuel cell bus also has a battery that powers an electric engine, but that battery is actually charged with a fuel cell. And instead of charging the vehicle with a plug, you'll fuel it with hydrogen. So it's really an electric bus with a hydrogen fuel cell extender. So the 2 vehicles have a lot in common. I'm actually not going to go through this. I think you can all hopefully have reviewed this and you can ask any questions if you'd like to. So just a little bit about battery electric buses. One of the big challenges is understanding the range that you can get out of these vehicles. So part of the challenge is just really understanding what you're getting, even if you think you're buying a 440 kilowatt hour battery, which is pretty large, that should get you about 200 miles. But you don't really have access to the 100% of that battery. So some of it's reserved for longevity. And then the last 10% is really degraded performance. So that really gets you to about 160 miles. And then you have battery degradation. So with any electronics like your phone or anything like that, it just doesn't hold the charge quite as well as it ages. So we estimated 30% battery degradation because most manufacturers will have a warranty to help you replace battery packs at that point. But until you hit that 30%, you're going to be operating, maybe a 115-mile range. So that's one of the biggest challenges with electric buses. I will say that the ranges for the battery sizes for these buses are getting a lot larger. So it does kind of help fix the problem, but you'll always have kind of that limited usage and battery degradation. Oh, sorry. And then one more slide, just kind of incorporating that HVAC system. When you're running the heat, you're decreasing the mileage that you get even further. So there are 3 types of battery electric bus charging. So this will kind of help with the later parts of the presentation. So there's slow depot charging where you kind of charge in your facility overnight. And then there's fast charging where you can kind of charge while you're in service or en route at a major transit center when you're already having a layover. So you have that conductive charging, that's the overhead pantograph, or inductive wireless charging that's embedded in the pavement. These are some of the kind of benefits and challenges of hydrogen fuel cell buses, which I'm not going to go over in detail. And then just a little bit about hydrogen fuel sources. This is really the biggest challenge with hydrogen fuel cell buses is getting that source of hydrogen. Sorry, was there a question? Okay. So in terms of finding a source of hydrogen, I think there's a lot of optimism right now in the industry because of a lot of the investments that the Department of Energy is making. There's a huge regional clean hydrogen hubs program where a lot of regions throughout the US are vying to become one of these hydrogen hubs. There's also the hydrogen shot, which is the goal to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen to be $1 per kilogram in 1 decade, which would be a huge game changer for the industry. Just for comparison, most hydrogen right now is $9 or $10 per kilogram. So that's if you were able to get it down to $1, that's a 90% decrease. So just another note, Washington Gas is doing a pilot program where they're actually going to generate their own clean hydrogen, and they're talking with different agencies about potentially selling some of that hydrogen as well. So our team did some zero emission bus route modeling in order to understand how different types of buses would operate in the ART service in the local climate, kind of understanding the average weather, temperatures, and things like that. So we tested a couple different scenarios where we looked at different types of vehicles, different battery sizes, electric heater versus a diesel heater. Obviously, it's not ideal to put a diesel heater on an electric bus. So we actually ended up going away from that scenario. And I guess as the key takeaway is really that fleet expansion was needed for most of the battery electric bus scenarios because of that range limitation. That problem might be solved later with technological advancements, but right now it's definitely still a challenge. But with hydrogen fuel cell buses, you could do a 1-for-1 replacement with CNG buses. And then on-route charging would also increase the range, but it's definitely going to be a challenge in terms of just the need to have, land to put these and lots of governmental agreements if you're going to share sites with other agencies or put a charger on a site that you don't own. So based on all of this analysis that we've done, we've come up with a phased transition plan. So the first phase is not actually purchasing zero emission buses, but it's still a very important element. So the first phase is to purchase 15 CNG buses in 2023. And I'm going to go in detail about the other two phases, but I don't know, Pierre, are you on? I can also cover this slide if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm here. I can just quickly go through this. It's just this is state of our current fleet. We do have 15 NABI buses that need to be replaced. NABI is no longer in business. It's a defunct bus company, manufacturer company. As you can see, we are spending a lot on maintenance costs to keep these buses in operation. And they haven't been reliable in terms of keeping them in service at only 67% of the time since June 30th. And we are at the end of the useful life, so these buses will need to be replaced, but we also have 16 other NABIs that will need to be replaced in the next few years.
Great, thanks, Pierre. So that's really the reasoning behind this purchase of 15 CNG buses. It's going to be really important to get these out of service as soon as possible to maintain that high quality of service for transit users. The other challenge is that you can't really deploy battery electric buses until the AOMF facility is prepared to basically charge those buses, and that won't happen until 2025. But there is potential to fuel some of the new CNG buses coming in could be fueled with renewable natural gas. And we'll actually talk about this a little bit later on. So phase 2 is conducting a zero emission bus pilot program. So really piloting both battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell buses in 2025 and 2026. This will allow for a side-by-side evaluation to really understand what works best for the ART fleet in the ART service in the local climate and things like that. So these will be a slight fleet expansion just to ensure that the quality of service is not impacted. And then phase 3 is really kind of based on all of the learning and experience that happens from the pilot program. ART staff will kind of decide which way makes most sense in terms of going down the path of looking at battery electric buses or hydrogen fuel cell buses. Which I think the next slide kind of provides some helpful information there. So this is a visualization of how you would get to a 100% zero emission fleet using battery electric buses. So as I mentioned in 2023, sorry, is that a time limit? Okay, maybe that was something else.
Just keep going.
Okay. So in 2023, those CNG buses will be purchased. In 2025 and 26. The pilot program will get going. Starting in 2028, ART will no longer purchase CNG vehicles. And starting in 2029, all of the CNGs will be fueled with renewable natural gas. And then in 2038, you get to a 100% zero emission fleet. I will point out, starting in 2031, you do see that the number of buses will go beyond the facility capacity because of that ratio of battery electric buses to CNG buses. So that's going to be a challenge that, maybe this problem is put off by technological advancements, but it will be something that the ART staff will have to think about, is possibly expanding a facility or buying another facility. And then, all of the dates on this right side are the same for this one, but you can see this is for a hydrogen fuel cell bus scenario. So you don't have those issues with the capacity because you can do that one-for-one replacement. I guess, okay, so this is just a helpful side-by-side. And I will say, you have challenges with the battery electric buses due to facility space, but the challenge with that fuel cell is really making sure that you can find that source of clean hydrogen, which, collaborating with Washington Gas and other potential providers, we'll see if that's a feasible option. So just quickly, we looked at greenhouse gas emissions as the transition occurred. So you can see the emissions are consistently coming down. Part of that is by fueling those CNG buses with renewable natural gas. And you really see a drop off here in 2029 because all of those CNG buses will be fueled with RNG at that point. There's a bit of an uptick after 2029, which is interesting. And that's because the battery electric buses are not fueled with electricity that's 100% renewable. But eventually you do get there in 2050 once the grid is 100% renewable. And then we assumed for hydrogen fuel cell buses, those would be fueled with green hydrogen. And then a similar, charts for other types of tailpipe emissions. All of those, carbon monoxide and VOC and SOx emissions will go to zero in 2038 with the 100% zero emission bus transition, but you will still have some low levels of particulate matter just from the operation of the buses, with the tires and the brake pads and small things like that. So I went through that very quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can wait till the end if you'd all like.
Let's wait till the end.
Great.
Okay, Carly, I appreciate that. Just would like to update this. This slide is it's a depiction of the process at our water pollution control plant, and it's really the reason that we're walking through this is the reference that Carly made to renewable natural gas, or RNG. Wanted to just explain what's going on here inside Arlington County to produce that. We have a solids master plan. It's about a $170 million capital investment through our utility fund, and it's currently under design at the water pollution control plant. And it's really a process we're excited about because it's holistically here, generated in the county, and it ends in the county. So it's not something that is out in some distant place that we're taking advantage of remotely. It provides both a solid, which you see at the bottom of the slide, but also a renewable natural gas or biogas that is in the middle of the slide, shown them by the recycled symbol. Next slide. And so this slide provides a quick look inside the process. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I would note that the process we're using at the water pollution control plant is anaerobic digestion. It's the same process used by DC Water at their Blue Plains plant, and it produces the gas that we're discussing tonight. But what has to happen from the actual digester is it has to be conditioned or cleaned to be able to do a pipeline injection to the standards of Washington Gas. So as you move from left to right, you will see the gas and how it migrates. And I'm not going to go through all the boxes, but I would note to the far right, the exhaust has no methane exhaust coming from the exhaust system. And this is a closed system so it doesn't have leakage that you might hear some talk about in the gas industry. The one thing too I would note about RNG, it's a renewable natural gas, and we're planning to come online with that in 2029 at the plant. Our RNG is considered a biogenic gas and can be used to offset greenhouse gas reductions. It is produced by the natural decaying of organic materials that would otherwise decompose in the environment. RNG produces both a gas volumetric component and also a instrument called a RIN, which is a renewable identification number. And that can be marketed, and it was established as part of the Renewable Fuel Standards Program back in 2005 as part of the Energy Policy Act. And so it's actually something we're pretty excited about, but it's just telling you that we're in discussions with this opportunity to help fuel the ART fleet that you see on the far right, with the symbol coming from the pressure boosting component to Washington Gas and the ART fleet ultimately. And in the interim, I would have to say what we're looking at is potentially a deal with one of our providers, Clean Energy, that we have a contract with at the light maintenance facility for equipment maintenance. And Lynn Rivers, the Transit Bureau Chief, who's with us here tonight, had a meeting with them just today. And we think we can secure, we now know we can secure renewable natural gas in that interim stage between 2023 and 2029, when the plant will come online with an actual renewable natural gas product in the county. So we're pretty excited about that opportunity. And I think it really provides an opportunity for us to really work closely with our plant to make this happen. Next slide. So as we conclude, this is at the last slide here. I would just note a few things that the team has learned in this process to date. The ART feasibility study is not complete to date. Its draft is projected for April of this year. But we have learned in the process that some of the early adopters of BEB technology, especially some of those we've benchmarked in California, Orange County, California, Alameda County, California, and even some in the region. Montgomery County is actually starting to pilot fuel cell electric buses in addition to the battery electric buses, in part because of some of the range issues you've been briefed on tonight, but also because it's a new technology, and we see a lot of movement in that space in the hydrogen hub area. We are working closely along with Montgomery County and some other transit properties with Washington Gas to explore the opportunity for the clean hydrogen that Carly referenced earlier. But because of that, we are in the near-term action that we need to apply for DRPT, and have actually done it as of yesterday for 15 CNG buses. And then there's an additional application. As Carly mentioned, the 4 electric buses will be in addition to the 78 bus fleet that we currently have. And that application was also submitted as of February 1st to DRPT to allow for those buses to be purchased and online when the AOMF or ART operation and maintenance facility is put online in 2025. These purchases will allow ART to maintain reliability for the ART operations, which is really critical for those our portion of our population that really depend on transit for their service, for their commute to work, and for multiple trips. And I would just note that even some of the agenda items you pointed out tonight, when we really focused in this presentation a lot about tailpipe emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but I think really when it comes down to it, transit plays even a more pivotal role to incentivize and allow for the multimodal approach that the county has taken, which is even a larger reduction in and of itself to get individuals from single occupancy vehicles into our buses and into transit and to other modes of transportation that really help bring down that greenhouse gas emission. So it really is important that we do this action for bus purchases in the interim, and we're projecting to use the renewable natural gas until we can bring on the renewable natural gas at the plant. And I think the one other thing I would point out in regard to that fleet transition plan that Carly outlined to you, we are looking at a zero emission, full fleet zero emissions commitment by 2038 for the ART fleet, which is a pretty exciting goal, pretty aspirational when you consider what other transit properties are putting out there for the entire fleet. So with that, public briefings and public engagement is ongoing. We've met with all the groups tonight. You're the last one, and we continue to just talk about this with the various stakeholders we have. So with that, we'd be glad to answer questions that the commission has.
Great, thank you so much. Commissioners, go ahead and let me know if you have questions or comments. I will just go ahead and get my comments out of the way, which is, as always, the most important emissions related thing that transit needs to do for me is get people out of their cars and get people around without their single occupancy vehicle trips. So my priorities are buses that can do the job and get people where they're going quickly and efficiently. And if we need to have two buses to do the work of one, that doesn't accomplish that. That takes up space that we need for buses that could be providing more service. So that will always continue to be my priority here. I know there are certainly competing priorities, but wanted to speak to that. Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Muradovic, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's more, it's important to understand art has its own priorities in terms of what it researches, and I'm glad that they're looking at a lot of different options. But I think it's important to keep an eye on the big picture, and that is better service, more frequent service, more reliable service will do more to get people out of single occupancy vehicles. I know I can speak for myself and for a lot of my work colleagues who during the pandemic have actually started driving to work into DC, whereas we took transit before because of some of the lack of reliability in terms of service. So I would like to see like I would be more excited about a 16-man bus that runs at 6-minute headways than a hydrogen-powered ART bus, which would be great. But I mean, it's kind of I feel like the lowest priority in terms of what we should be decarbonizing. And also there was a big focus on tailpipe emissions, GHG emissions, but there's a lot of other pollutants out there. I know brake residue, microplastics from tires were kind of mentioned in the studies. These are even more with the electric buses. So, I mean, I know I'm kind of rambling right now, but I just hope we can look at the big picture of what will get people out of vehicles, and that's fast and reliable service. And I'm fine with even a diesel bus doing that.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Yeah, I'd like to join my fellow commissioners in that comment. All too often, I wanted to take the bus and ended up walking where I wanted to go because the bus never came because there was a half-hour headways. We really need, honest to God, transit of 6 to 10-minute headways, and we need buses to do that. And the more buses we can get, regardless of how they're running, is how you get people out of their cars because they know they can walk and take a bus and get something right away. That said, I do have a technical question. With the hydrogen buses, they still have batteries. Does that mean that the battery is constantly being recharged by the fuel cell? So we really don't have the same range issues and eventually the battery degrading issues that we would have with a battery recharge bus?
Yeah, that's actually exactly spot on. There's a smaller battery on a hydrogen fuel cell bus, and the hydrogen is able to keep it at an ideal state where it doesn't degrade the same way that a battery electric bus battery does. Eventually, it will degrade and it may need to be replaced, but it'll be a smaller battery pack, and that'll take a lot longer to do.
So we would need potentially fewer hydrogen buses simply because they can keep running way longer. Their range is limited by the amount of hydrogen that's stored in its tank, rather than the charge running out and then the time it takes to regenerate the battery from a battery recharge bus.
Yes. Yeah. So most of the hydrogen buses on the market right now have a comparable range to a CNG bus. So you can do that one-to-one replacement.
Great, thank you. That's good. That's good. That seems to be really the way to go. Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Yeri keeps like moving his hand in a way that I think maybe he wants to talk, but I'm not sure.
I was just going to say I'd like to echo everything that's already said because I love writing the art system. It just feels like my notes say there's just so much more opportunity to squeeze out of the system in terms of improving frequency, operational efficiency, that I really hope we are closely considering whether or not the money here is the best way to decarbonize.
Commissioner Land, tell me.
Yeah, the one observation I want to make is the battery recharge bus seems to fit best for school buses actually, because they're only used twice a day and they have plenty of time to recharge. That's where I would invest the money for the recharge buses.
And just to note that, I know the commission probably is aware of this, but we are currently piloting 3 battery electric buses in our APS fleet down at the Trade Center currently. So that is being investigated, and I think you are correct on the opportunities to do midday charging and off-peak charging for them is a lot different than how we run our ART fleet.
Yeah, hard to find a spot to recharge at the Ballston Metro. Doing a lot of other
exactly.
stuff on that block.
Yeah.
All right, seeing no other hands, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last item on the agenda is the Transit Strategic Plan. And we have Pierre Holloman and Paul Monnier for that presentation. And I'm happy to present it from here if you need to. Okay, great.
Good evening. My name's Paul Mounier. I'm the art service planner. Thank you for letting me come and let us speak to you about the Arlington strategic plan that we were working on, the transit strategic plan. Just to preface this a little bit, we're coming to give you an update. Right now, we are in the process of finalizing a gaps and needs analysis, and we are moving into service recommendations. We haven't got there quite yet. So this is just a kind of a status update of where we are, what we've done, and where we're going. And in the next couple of months, we will be at that point with service recommendations, and be happy to come back and talk to you about that at that time. But we did want to get in front of you and give you a little update of where we are. I will try to go through this quickly so we can have some questions at the end. Next slide. Why are we doing a strategic plan? Essentially, this is going to be a 10-year comprehensive plan that outlines how service will be provided in the county, as I said, for the next 10 years. It is a living document. The recommendations in the plan won't be set in stone. It is reviewed every year to ensure that the recommendations that were made are still feasible and the correct way to move forward. As you know, things can change, and plans do have to change. The other reason we're doing this is it is something that the Virginia General Assembly is asking us to do. We used to do a transit development plan. Now that we are considered a large transit agency, we are doing a strategic plan. And what this serves a purpose at the state level is for DRP to take a look at what we're doing, know what we're doing, and plan their budget for providing funding for service and capital projects. Next slide, please. And here's just a kind of a simple graphic showing how the process is working. We started with framework, our purpose, mission, goals, looking at equity, asking for guidance, and reviewing existing conditions, as well as doing a gaps and needs analysis. We are now in the planning phase of this, looking at the needs analysis, determining what needs there are, and making recommendations. When we go through the recommendations, we are not going to be constrained with it. We're going to look at everything. And then the constraints come up in the next section where we start looking at the financial commitment, also the infrastructure and constraints that we may have from fleet and facilities. And then evaluation, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, using standards and metrics. And each year going back essentially to the beginning and reviewing the recommendations for each year. Next slide. There's some parallel efforts underway that will be included in the study, but we're not actually doing it under this process. You just heard about the zero emissions bus study. Obviously, that has a huge impact on the way that we're going to be providing service, and it will be included with the service recommendations once we start constraining the plan. And as you can see, the student fare program and the fleet replacement program. And one that isn't on here is the WMATA Building a Better Bus Network study that we're very much involved with. And it would be remiss not to mention that, though, that isn't something that we're actually driving, but we are a big part of that and heavily involved in that study. Next slide, please. So here is kind of the public timeline or public engagement timeline for the project. Grant funding was approved in 2021. We began the process in late May of 2022. We had virtual meetings and pop-ups over the fall. We've been to our Transportation Advisory Committee. We are here to speak to you today to let you know where we are. And the recommendations, as I said, we're in the gap analysis, but we will be looking to have recommendations complete by March 10th. The reason that's such an exact date is that it's the same time that Metro is expected to be complete and releasing their recommendations from the Better Bus Network. Again, hugely important with the amount of service that Metro provides in the county, that we are complementing that service and making the best use of the resources we have while leveraging the great amount of service that Metro provides. After the recommendations are made public, we will have another round of virtual meetings, pop-ups, meeting people where they are, seeing if we got the recommendations right. And then after that, we will need to go to the board to get approval. The DRPT and the General Assembly requires that the governing body of the transit agency adopt the plan. As part of this, we have developed a vision and mission for Arlington Transit. This is our highest level guiding principles for the way that we are going to move forward with providing transit, and look to this as we make any recommendations and any decisions about the service. Here's a little summary of our public engagement. We had an online feedback form. We published a virtual public meeting, and we had 7 pop-up in-person engagements held throughout Arlington. You can see those locations. It was one of the most, one of the best outreaches, particularly the pop-ups that I've been involved with, really getting out and talking to the community. Part of the public engagement was we had developed goals for the service. As you can see here, they're roughly broken up into 3 groups: safety, quality, and performance, equity and sustainability, and communication and collaboration. And as you can see by the results, very positive results, even though the safety, quality, and performance looks a little lower on the strongly agree. That's still over 70% of agree or strongly agree. You can see that the environmental and equity and environmental sustainability very high also, and communication and collaboration also well into the 80% range. Next slide. As part of the public outreach, what we wanted to do is we wanted to ask about people's experience with the system. And the first question we asked, what is most important to you when you choose transit? And we gave people these options to tell us what was most important to them, pick three of the options you see here. And you can see in some places where there's a difference between what we heard online and what we heard in the field, particularly the waiting areas that feel safe, well lit, and secure. There was a kind of a difference there, which is interesting. Next slide, please. The second question we asked is, what is your biggest challenge when you use transit, and what's preventing, to get an idea of what may be preventing you from using transit? You know, frequency, number one, and judging by the comments that I heard previously in regards to the zero emission bus, I don't think it's any surprise that that is the number one concern that people have. Right below that is bus and trains coming at the time that I need to travel. And this kind of speaks to the fact that maybe the peak is becoming less important, and people want to use transit in the midday and later in the day. If someone is working from home but is starting to go back into the office, maybe they're leaving at 11 in the morning, or maybe they're leaving at 2 and only spending part of the day in the office. And these are some of the things that we're looking at as we are looking at the gaps analysis and move forward with recommendations. Next slide, please. And coming out of that public outreach, what we've learned from the industry, talking to our partners regionally and nationwide, these are some very general high-level needs that we've identified, or issues and that provide opportunity for us to build the system and get more ridership. And as you can see, better frequency at the top, and span of service, and improve reliability. Three things which I think are no surprise to this group. And some of the ideas over to the right side that we're at a very high level considering. And if we, I don't want to go through this, I don't want to take too much time, so if we can go to the next slide. And then again, better accuracy of real-time data was something that I heard personally quite a bit, and I understand the way the riders are experiencing the bus now. It's not so much we look at a schedule as we look at a phone or an electronic board at a station. Next slide, please. We'll talk about the some of the geographic gaps and some of the geographic analysis we did in a very high level, broad way, and show you some of the findings we have. We used a bivariate analysis that used kind of a supply and demand, which I'll explain a little bit on the next slide. We're looking at equity, identified areas, transit-oriented populations, projected job growth, and projected population growth are the things that we're going to go over. We have also looked at destination analysis, transit centers, MWCOG activity centers. In addition to the MWCOG activity centers, we have those identified, obviously identified by MWCOG as activity centers, but we also split the rest of the county into neighborhoods using the same TAZs that MCOG does to help with destination analysis. So that we weren't just looking at the activity centers, but we were looking at the whole of Arlington County, and putting that in and digesting it so that we can identify the underserved connections, our needs and gaps in the county. Next slide. So just real quickly on the next maps, the bivariate analysis, essentially you were taking two variables and you are measuring them together to see where the correlation is. So, and this was the only graph I had, but what you do is and replica rank and transit rank. If I could just use it, let's say this is the instead of replica rank, say transit trips and the number of transit trips in an area, and then a variable such as transit-oriented population and the number of the population there. You would move up on the axis for the transit trips, and then you would move along the x-axis for the transit rank trips, and where those 2 points converge is where you are. The line here is kind of the median, and essentially above that line is the what is potentially underserved. So when we look at these maps on the coming up, we are looking at the very bright red, that light pink, and that very dark purple, because that tells us where there may be an opportunity to provide additional transit to improve ridership and service. Next slide, please. So looking at vehicle trips versus daily ridership. So up on the y-axis, you move up vehicle trips, and then you move right on the x-axis for the number of daily bus trips, essentially. And as I said, again, you're looking for that deep purple and pink, which are some on the west side of Pentagon City, and then just south of Columbia Pike. Next slide, please. And then this is that same analysis, but we used both ART and WMATA to try to identify those areas, and you can see it is slightly changed. There is some pink to the south of Crystal City, and still the purple south of Columbia Pike or north of Columbia Pike. Minority and low income populations. Again, going up the x-axis for the trips and going along the y-axis for the minority population, and along the x-axis for trips. Again, looking at the dark reds, pinks, and that dark purple. Vehicle trips for transit-oriented population, and that is a series of categories that we use to identify what is a transit-oriented population. And this is a typical industry standard. These are the type of categories that you would use. I do understand, transit in Arlington isn't necessarily judged by that, but this is where we would typically find the best return on investment for providing service. This slide is regarding job growth, and the dark purple, bright red, and pink areas show where doing some investment in transit could increase and help stimulate job growth. Population growth, again, looking at areas where investments in transit will support population growth around the county. And when you overlay all those maps together, these are some areas, these yellow circles, these are the neighborhoods that look like we should take a closer look at to determine if we can help fill those gaps in service. I want to just point out, it's an indication. It's telling us, it's pointing us in the direction where we need to look, and giving us an idea of where we need to look. That does not mean these are the only areas that we are going to look at. That does not mean that those are the only factors that we look at. But this does provide us a little bit of a roadmap to determine where we can improve service. And the next steps, speaking to the Transportation Committee, we would like to go to the Planning Commission to give them an update and let them know what we are doing, and the C2E2 Commission also eager to hear about the type of service that we were going to be providing. We will have a technical memo coming out on March 10th, again, a very specific date, because it is working in conjunction with the Better Bus Network redesign. So that would be the next big date and point in what we're doing, where we really start having our recommendations fleshed out. We've been working with internal and external technical committees, and we'll continue to do that. And we'll continue to come to committees and commissions as much as they would like us to speak on this. And then once that is released, we have our public outreach, see if we got things right. We will draft the report and look to have the board approve that final report in June. And that is it. So if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you very much. I think this may be the first time in 11 years on the commission that there was ever a slide that was too nerdy for me, but we've got completed. Congratulations on the bivariant analysis slide. I think my main question is that I'm still not 100% clear on is how the WMATA Better Bus Network redesign and the ART TSP interact with each other. It's feeling a little siloed. Can you talk about how ART service and Metro bus service kind of interact and feed off each other, and how one plan is kind of affecting the other plan at this point?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it does feel a little solid because WMATA is doing their plan and we're doing our plan. The fact of the matter is WMATA provides about 45% of the bus service in Arlington County, but that is part of a regional network. That is buses that are coming from outside the county, coming to and through the county to provide service. The way these two interact is for our study, what we want to do, and we're also involved with, and I want to make sure that I make this clear, we are heavily involved with the Metro Better Bus network redesign, but that is to develop a regional transportation network. It is not necessarily to focus on service in Arlington County. What we want to do, and why it's so important, is we want to leverage that regional network that comes through Arlington County and complement it with the ART service, whether it is to provide coverage to neighborhoods, whether it is to increase frequency on certain corridors, or provide a longer span of service to get people moving around Arlington. We're very unique. Arlington County is a very important regional transportation area geographically, and the amount of Metro service cannot be overlooked, and leveraging that service and having all that service from Metro really is a huge benefit to Arlington County. So that is kind of the way these two studies are interacting. We're helping Metro build the regional bus network, and then we are doing our plan to leverage that regional bus network to provide the best transit service and the best accessibility for Arlington County residents.
Great, thank you very much. Other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Brose.
Yeah, just a comment. Even as it's a little geeky to have all that data there, I will commend you guys for incorporating it in your strategic plan, because I think identifying the areas where the service is really needed is, or where it's missing, I guess is the right way to say that, is probably critical in terms of looking at a long-term strategy. So applaud you to pay attention to that and continue to incorporate it in your plan.
Other commissioner comments, questions? Commissioner Ludlow.
Yeah, so I just had a broad question about kind of taking into account the significant changes that we've seen in kind of working from home and commuting during the pandemic, and just wanted to see how you were addressing those in this plan.
Yeah, and there obviously there's been changes, but we're trying to do is we're trying to look at what is that we do talk about in our current conditions some of the COVID and how it's changing patterns, but we want to identify those patterns. We don't want to really compare and critique. We want to know how people use the system today and how they see themselves using the system as they go forward. So the outreach was specifically, what are you doing today? Not what were you doing before COVID? What are you doing now? It's how are you using it today and how can we make it better for you as we move forward. We do have a lot of, we do have industry trends that we are seeing. We're seeing trends regionally, we're seeing trends nationwide, which are talking about, it's obviously the peak seems to be becoming less important, and it's really the midday, evening, weekend, and off hours that are becoming more important. And identifying how to bring that service to people is what we're focusing on.
Thank you.
My other question is, when I'm trying to decide how to get someplace, one of the most important things I'm looking at, certainly not the only, is how quickly I can get there via particular mode. And a lot of the feedback and the priorities and stuff that are discussed earlier in the deck talk a lot about frequency, which is one part of that, right? That means I'm not waiting as long for a transit vehicle, but I didn't see a whole lot that speaks to the other part of getting where you're going quickly, which is how quickly the bus can actually get from where it picks you up to where it drops you off. Specifically thinking about, strategies like transit signal priority, which is covered under reliability, but not really, speed, and all-door boarding, and even, stop consolidation. So we're just, stopping fewer times on the route. Is travel time a significant metric or priority that you're looking at? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because and we look at it in terms of mobility versus accessibility. And when you're talking about mobility, it's just moving people as fast as you can, as many people as you can. When you're talking about accessibility, you're talking about moving people to the places they need to go at a speed that's is competitive with other modes. So that is something we look at. So those strategies are spoken to in the document, and I know I went through the broad ones very quickly, but there are mentions of bus lanes, traffic signal priority, and forget the and potentially, looking at more direct routes instead of forcing transfers. Of course, all that comes with when you start talking about that, there's some trade-offs, but that is absolutely something that we are looking at, and it's really to make the bus competitive with any other mode. So that point is is well taken.
Great. I think, Commissioner Yeri, did you have? Oh, stretch. All right. The other thing, the last time we did a big TDP update, which was a long time ago, I was really disappointed at the end of the day that we didn't have what I think of as really important high-level metrics to understand where the plan was taking us. So there wasn't a sense of, today 75% of Arlington households live within a 5-minute walk of a frequent bus. And, at the end of our plan implementation, 95% of Arlingtonians are going to live within a 5-minute walk of a frequent bus. Is that in scope for this strategic plan? Or are we going to have a sense at the end of the day how much this plan is going to move the needle in a kind of a relatable and understandable way of mobility for Arlingtonians?
Yeah, that's something that we are discussing. The service metrics that we talked about in the last TDP may not be appropriate for what we are trying to do today. Particularly metrics that look at peak service and stuff. But yeah, we were absolutely looking at even that specific metric where it was previously Arlingtonians that are within a quarter mile or walking distance of transit versus what you're mentioning right now, Arlingtonians that are within walking distance of high frequency transit. And I agree with you. And that is something that we're looking at. What are the more appropriate measures? And if you have any other suggestions, please pass those along so that we can consider them.
All right, I won't in this meeting, but I will
Yeah.
follow up with you later. Anybody else? All right, I am seeing no other hands, so I will thank you very much for the, again, very in-depth and greatly appreciated update on the TSP. And we look forward to what appears to me to be a quite intense and quick phase coming up here between service recommendations and final adoption.
Excellent. Thank you, and let us know if you would like a update in the future.
That concludes the agenda. Thank you. And now we're on to other business. Is there anything else we need to discuss?
Anybody have any updates for the good of the commission?
No, this is just a request, Ms. Obakoya. It looks like, at least on my phone, the strategic plan was uploaded twice. The zero bus study was not to the website presentation.
The strategic plan was uploaded twice?
Yeah, the zero bus study was not uploaded.
That was a mistake.
If you would
I'll correct that.
correct that, then we'll have a reference. Thank you.
Awesome. While we're talking about the website, I did have somebody reach out to me last week trying to figure out what was involved in testifying in front of the commission and could not really figure out what was involved. And I went to the website, and I do think we probably need some updates there now that we're mostly in person to make it really clear that it's possible to comment virtually and how you get on the list and get a link to the Teams meeting, and that it's possible to comment in person and what's involved in that, especially with potentially discussing missing middle at our next meeting. I think there may be a couple people who want to comment. We should probably go ahead and straighten that out right now.
Yeah, get that going. So the zero emissions bus study was updated, but I think that was a revision to the other plan, and I put it in the wrong place. So some of you may have seen it prior to this afternoon. Okay. So I'll correct that. And the commenting in person, thank you. I have language for that.
Great.
Needs to go on the website.
Awesome. Anything else? Anybody reporting in from SPRC and LRPC? Anything like that? All right. If you have any questions on what you volunteered for, just follow up with me via email.
I also think I may have, sure, follow up with an email, but I may have something here.
All right. Then somebody left this gavel here, and I'm going to use it. We are adjourned.
March 30th is the next meeting.
Yes.
In person. March 2nd. I have March 30. March is